All right, well, it's 6 o'clock. So just to be respectful of everybody's time, we'll go ahead and get started, but more people might be dropping in. We'll see.
Yeah, sounds great. So what I'd like to do to kick off our call is give an introduction for Jen. Um, and just as a reminder, everything that we're doing is recorded and uploaded to the portal. So I would encourage team members that weren't able to join us this week to certainly log into the portal and experience everything that we have to offer there in the form of the recorded sessions, as well as additional movement and meditation practices. But for tonight, we have Jennifer Siramboli. She is Studio B CEO and founder. Jen began her career in corporate sales in 1999 in the telecom industry. After nearly a decade of success in that industry, she suffered from burnout, trained to be a yoga teacher, and that transformed her life. Jen embraced her entrepreneurial spirit in December of 2008 when she opened Northeast Pennsylvania's premier yoga studio, Balance Yoga and Wellness. Wanting to spend more time on deep studies in yoga, the teachings of the Buddha, spiritual inquiry, and mindfulness meditation, Jen sold Balance in 2015. Reflecting on her long career in corporate sales, she recognized that she had learned some of the methods and techniques of mindfulness meditation years ago, she might have been better able to meet and manage the stress in a healthier way. From that insight, Studio B was born. Tonight, Jen is going to present anchoring, using the breath in the body to achieve steadiness. And as I mentioned before, please, use the portal while it's there for you as a resource to log in and access the guided meditations and additional support and resources that we have. So with that, I will hand it over to Jen. Thank you.
Thank you, Gretchen. Thank you and welcome. It's great to be here with all of you this evening. And I wanted to just start out before we get into the slide presentation. I'd like to do a practice. It's been a long day and it'll just be a nice way to ground and center before we dip in. So feel free to turn off your camera if you're not comfortable with that, or you can keep it on. That's up to you. Wherever you're at, sitting in either a chair or a cushioned seat, I'd like you to come forward on your chair and ground your feet so that the feet are settled right underneath the knees. And then you also have an option to stand up. So feel free, especially if you're feeling a little sluggish, it will just bring in the energy up a little bit. So that's up to you. Okay. So whether you're sitting or standing, you could just close your eyes if that feels comfortable, or take your gaze forward, preferably away from your computer. Just take the gaze forward and land your gaze forward and down, just softening the gaze. And just taking a moment here to settle in, settling into the body. And taking a moment to really orient to your environment, noticing where the body is sitting, how the body is sitting. Acknowledging any sounds of life happening around you. So perhaps your family or children, perhaps some noise outside. Just really opening this field of awareness to include the environment, your senses. And now just bringing your attention inward, landing your attention in the physical body. And guide your attention gently down into your feet. And you might even wiggle your toes if you're having trouble connecting, perhaps feeling your feet inside your shoes or your bare feet against the floor. Inviting stillness. And noticing any subtleties of sensation. Noticing all of the aliveness in your feet. And encouraging a heaviness, a landing here in the feet, just a grounding. And gently bringing your attention up into the legs, noticing your sit bones and hips. See if you could get really weighted and heavy in the seat. And you might notice that you're pulled away or distracted, or there's lingering thoughts, planning thoughts, imagining thoughts, whatever it is. Just acknowledge that you're pulled away, whatever the distraction is, and see if you could gently guide yourself back into your body, your feet, noticing how the body's sitting. Notice how the hands feel against your legs. And just remembering that it's normal to get pulled away. It's normal to get tied up in some distraction, to notice a discomfort and feel yourself wander from presence. With gentleness, with kindness, acknowledge and gently return back, coming back into the body just as it is. Notice that the body is breathing. And you might even softly say that to yourself, silently say that. The body breathes. Just relaxing into the expansion and contraction of the breath. And just noticing how that feels to reside in the body that breathes. This body that's sitting. This body fully supported right now, where everything's really okay. And just another moment here in the breath, just noticing how it feels. Noticing how the mind wanders and what it feels like to catch it wander, acknowledging the distraction and gently returning. And when you're ready, you could just simply open your eyes and come back into the space after you feel reoriented, just inviting the light back in, perhaps turning your camera back on, that's up to you. So I'm going to share my screen and pull the presentation up. Let's see where that is. Okay. Okay, can you guys see the presentation? Is it sharing properly?
Yep.
Just cool, great. Okay, so what we just experienced was a very basic anchoring practice, anchoring into the body. And we introduced this practice very early on, just as we did today, because the simple fact is that the body and the breath are always existing in the present moment. Okay, so right now, just notice where your breath is. Notice if you're on the inhale or on the exhale or in between. And then notice as soon as you're noticing, the breath changes because the breath is constantly operating in the present moment, and so is the body. And so we could train up this skill to return to an anchor to create an ease and steadiness inside, just as a boat would in the stormy sea. So with that anchor down, the boat's going to ride those waves. However, we could always just come back to the boat. And so the anchor in the practices of mindfulness meditation act in the same way. And that return is the difficult part and the most potent. So it's really important, right? We don't have to feel diminished. We don't have to feel like we're doing something wrong when we notice that we've been caught up in distraction and worry, in thinking, in planning, whatever it is, in sound, the dog barking. That's normal. That's how the brain works. And it's in that noticing and that gentle return back to an anchor, whether that anchor is established in the body or the breath or in different ways, which we will keep learning as we go along, that we build the mental musculature, the musculature of the mind, to strengthen neural pathways and remain steady when the stress undoubtedly comes in and starts rocking that boat. So that's what we'll be talking about today. I wanted to start here because, well, first of all, I love all these smiley faces. And, you know, here we are, mindfulness, this word that has become part of our pop culture. What I've been reflecting on as I'm talking to the other folks in your group earlier is, wow, you go to the grocery store and you see this word, the word mindfulness or mindful, slapped on products, on the covers of magazines, on books, because it's just part of our life now. And it has been for the last 50 years, as a matter of fact. About 50 years ago, mindfulness came to the United States in a big way. And it mainly came in through the work of Jon Kabat-Zinn, who was a pioneer in the field of secular mindfulness and mindfulness-based stress reduction as a therapeutic modality, which has been now widely embraced across Western culture and Western psychology. When Jon Kabat-Zinn, who was, by the way, a very serious practitioner and student of very traditional practices in India, when he had those experiences in different cultures, and this experience for him was both secular in nature because he was a scientist, but he also had a spiritual component to it. However, he knew that when he came back into the States, and by this time he was working at the University of Massachusetts, that he would have to strip the spirituality out in order for Americans to really embrace the opportunity and the practices. And he was it was very important to him right away to establish a very rigid, a very disciplined practice format so that it could be tested and proved scientifically. And that's exactly what happened because of how he set it up. So in the last 20 years, and I looked at the statistic yesterday because I hadn't looked at it for several months. In the last 20 years, there have been over 7,000 studies on the efficacy of mindfulness in the fields of neuropsychology and neuroscience. And the studies are very well done, and the evidence is overwhelmingly positive. And now that research has really, it's matured enough. So now they're really digging into specific mindfulness for specific, as specific remedy for certain conditions, and we'll get into that in a moment. But first, I want to lay the foundation of how Jon Kabat-Zinn defined mindfulness, because really that hasn't changed at all. So what he said is that mindfulness is the act of paying attention in a particular way. So I want to emphasize that, and we'll come back to it as we go through the presentation tonight. In a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, remember body, breath, and without judgment, non-judgmentally. So let's unpack that. At Studio B, we like to define mindfulness as moment-to-moment awareness. Moment-to-moment awareness. Moment-to-moment awareness without the need, desire, without the obsession of the moment being any different from what it is. So it really brings us into a relationship with reality. So in other words, we could be in the beauty of our lives and be fully present, because we don't want to miss out on that, quite frankly. And we could be in the muck of it, fully present and open and curious and in relationship to the difficulties without turning away from them. And that's the power of this practice. It strengthens our capacity, our bandwidth to be with our life directly. And of course, it's extremely flexible. It's very adaptable. It's extremely simple, every practice, even though there are many. They're very, very simple. And simple does not mean easy, right? So these very simple instructions could be very, very difficult, very difficult. I'll never forget, I did a lot of work with a CEO of a company, and he came to me after maybe 5 or 6 sessions, and he was doing some work on his own. And he said, well, I said, how did things go? He said, well, Jen, what I realized is that it's a circus in here, and I don't want to be at the circus, and I never liked the circus, and I want to run away from the circus. So, so it isn't always easy, right? Simple doesn't mean easy. But when we practice consistently over time, over a long period of time, and when I say a long period of time, most people feel the benefits of mindfulness practice, a formal mindfulness meditation practice, after about 6 to 8 weeks, they start feeling it. We start feeling all these benefits. So alertness, presence, joy, sympathetic joy. How can we be in joy in relationship when we're feeling like crap inside, right? When we're going through the difficulties, how can we still be in joyful presence? Freedom. What does freedom mean?
Is it different?
So,
And can I just ask, can I ask a question?
yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so is it different? So when you talked about, experiencing, so the joy of life, right? Everybody wants to be there for that. But when you're in the muck of it, to use your words, most people probably aren't enjoying being in the muck of it. And so you'd rather almost turn away or get out of that. Maybe if you use your CEO's vernacular, get out of the circus, didn't want to be there, right? And so how is it different practicing mindfulness for happy, joyful events versus not? Is it different once somebody's practiced and engaged in that, or is it somehow different?
Well, that's a good question. And I think it's important to be able to open to the joys and the sorrows, because those are just normal parts of being human. So how can we make sure that when the joy comes, that we're present for it? Because so often we miss it, right? So I told this story earlier about several years ago, probably more than several, about a decade ago. I was Christmas shopping with my children. And I have 4 children. And at the time they were all home, now 2 of them are adults. And Sophia, my now 16-year-old, was like 5 or 6. And of course, parents, we know how busy and chaotic the holidays are and how much stress is involved. and how we just start rushing around because we don't have time to get everything done. And we put this emphasis on all the wrong things, right? And so there I was in the mall shopping with my kids and yelling at them and being impatient and just rushing through it. And, you know, I noticed at some point that my 5-year-old was kind of lagging behind, and she was just standing there. And we were in Scranton, and there was like a second floor. And in the middle of the mall, there was this beautiful, magical display, you know, and she was just like eyes wide and open. And I walked over to her and I was like, "Hey, Sophia, come on, we gotta go." And she said, "Mommy, don't you see this?" And I stopped because at that point I hadn't seen it. And I stopped with her and I paused and I looked up, and I got really emotional in that moment because I realized, like, wow, you know, here we are. Here we are in this moment. And honestly, the only reason I remember that, and I could remember it in a really felt sense even as I'm talking to you, is because I was present with her in that moment. And so the beauty of life, so often we ignore, and that's exactly why I pulled this image, because I read an article many years ago that said the average person only witnesses 5 sunsets in their lifetime. You know, and that's so sad. The sun sets every night.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, so yeah, you know, part of it is experiencing those beautiful moments is much different when we're present. When we're in distraction and we're trying to multitask and figure out how to do 10 things at once, it's not the same. And so often the sorrows in life, you know, the other story, my grandmother died almost 3 years ago. She died on Christmas Eve, and I was very, very close to her. And it was a very, very difficult 2 years leading up to her death. And I was her primary caretaker. And I was sitting with her, and this was just a few days before she passed. And at that point, she was kind of in and out of presence, you know, just kind of, she had dementia. And I was just studying her hands and her smell, you know, and just the lines on her face, and just being with her. It was the most present I ever was in my entire life, the 3 months leading up to her death. And it was so precious. And that my practice at that point was her. That was my practice. It wasn't sitting and meditating in a corner. It was sitting in full presence with her and taking her in as she was able to be with me. Because sometimes she wasn't with me. You know, she was somewhere else.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, yeah, we got to turn towards the hard stuff too. And that's, I believe from my personal experience, that that's required and important. We don't want to miss out on those moments, as heavy as they are. And so often we've quite frankly become this culture of comfort. You know, as soon as this discomfort comes, we want to turn away. And unfortunately, this stuff doesn't go away. It stays with us, you know?
Yep.
So these practices, whether we're doing them in a formal or informal way, and there's both. What we just did together was a formal practice, but mindful moments, what I just described to you, can happen in any given moment, right? Right now, you're really present with me, right? I can feel it. And it's different when we're not.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wakes us up to the reality of life, and it gets us beyond patterns that aren't serving us, biases that we may not even know are there, right? And that's important work too. But those insights come from stillness and quiet, and they come when the brain is not in a state of stress. They come when the brain isn't flooded with adrenaline and cortisol. So when we're tied up, and we're going to get to that in a second, when we're tied up, when we're yanked around by feelings and stories in the mind, and also chemicals in the body, we don't have access to insights and higher thinking and critical problem solving. We don't have access to innovation and creativity in the same way. And this has been proven by science. So this list is important, and we'll get it to you after our call today, but it in no way is comprehensive. So I just picked highlights. You know, this list could go on and on and on. And I want to just point out a few things, because of course you could read this on your own, but the number one reason people turn to these practices, whether it's mindfulness meditation, whether it's qigong, whether it's tai chi, whether it's pranayama practices, breathing practices, whether it's yoga or running, right, or gardening, they're looking to have a different relationship with stress. So they're really recognizing that, wow, stress is out of control and I'm not managing it well. And I want people to know right away up front that when you're starting here, the stress doesn't go away. Mindfulness doesn't magically make stress disappear, right? And not all stress is bad. So there is such a thing as good stress. And any successful person knows that, right? So if you have a deadline, that could be stressful, and it could propel you forward in a dramatic way to get things done. Mm-hmm. So stress becomes dangerous when it becomes chronic and unmanaged, and there's dramatic uncertainty associated with it. So when it feels completely out of our control. So right now, obviously, in the midst of the 2020, here we are, and we're all having this experience of feeling the uncertainty of the situation we're in, of dealing with circumstances that we never thought we'd have to deal with. And so stress is really getting, you know, out of control for many people. So people are looking for inner resources, development of inner resources, so they can meet stress in a healthier way. And that's why mindfulness, quite frankly, has risen to the top, because that's what it does. So through these practices, I want to also point out the cognitive benefits, because I'm fascinated by the brain. And I mentioned that Alzheimer's runs in our family. So witnessing my grandmother go through that, I'm really, really interested in protecting my own brain. And there's been some incredible studies that have come out, especially in the last 2 years, on how mindfulness protects the brain from the normal aging process. And the studies are excellent. They're very well done. There's University of Massachusetts is doing a ton of work, UCLA, the University of Madison, Wisconsin, just all of the big schools are doing a lot of studies on the neuroscience of mindfulness, and they're getting incredible results. So the brains of people that have long time meditation practices are dramatically different than people that have never done the practices, that are the same age and have the same profiles. It's really incredible. And we can share some of them with you. Of course, mindfulness, because of the way it transforms our relationship to stress, it's very good for our hearts. It's very good for our neurological systems. And it's essential, so important in helping to control chronic pain instead of reaching for addictive medications. We have a teacher on staff that is disabled. She was in a traumatic car accident not many years ago, about 8 years ago. And she's disabled from the hips down. And she turned to mindfulness meditation to help manage her pain. So she's just an incredible teacher. And of course, when we feel like we are feeling better inside, that ripples out into our relationships. And what we focus on as a company at Studio B is, once we teach people how to work with these practices and develop inner resources and start really noticing these changes and how the transformation's unfolding, we then help them understand how to apply those skills interpersonally. And of course, that transforms not only professional relationships, but most importantly, your closest relationships. So I wanted to keep this in here because it's so cool to understand why neurologically we get stuck in stress. So I have a question for you. How long do you think an average emotion like anger or disgust takes to move through your system?
Oh my. Depends on the person, probably, huh? But I know my wife's anger with me takes a long time to move through sometimes. So
There you go. There you go. Does anyone else want to answer that question? I'm sorry, I don't know this person's first name. So okay. Okay, so this has been studied, and you could, look it up to verify. But it takes the average emotion to move through the neurosystem 90 seconds. 90 seconds. So why does it linger longer? Days, months, years, lifetimes, right? I know people that have held grudges for 30 years. I'm sure you do too, right? So what happens, well, there's a lot of reasons for this, but we get really entangled in emotions when they come in. And just like we were talking about a few minutes ago, we turn away from them. We don't want to deal with it, right? It doesn't feel good. We just want to run. And stress plays a role in that. So the stress response, when we're feeling something that's really uncomfortable, or we feel unsafe, or we feel triggered, right? We respond. So the body and the breath respond immediately. They absorb whatever situation is at hand, whether or not we're paying attention, number one. And if we get really entangled in the stress of whatever's coming up, we literally get stuck in the part of the brain called the amygdala, which is near the brainstem, which is a very old part of the brain. And that part of the brain becomes very active in the stress response. So neurons in the brain that move through neural pathways, when they're firing together constantly, they wire hard together. They get stronger. That's what creates mental musculature in the brain. That's what grows the areas of the brain, the gray matter in the brain. And so if we're dealing with chronic stress and we're constantly flooding the brain with these stress hormones, we could literally get stuck there. And we lose the strong neural pathways to the other parts of the brain that deal with processing and higher thinking and problem solving. Like I said, the prefrontal cortex mainly deals with those things. And the prefrontal cortex, if we don't have access there, it's almost impossible to access the part of the brain that gives us access to creativity and insight and innovation, where we could be really free and open, right? So that's why when we're sitting at a sunset, or we're in prayer, or we get really quiet in life and calm and relaxed, we'll get this creative energy out of nowhere, right? Why people running through the woods do it, because they, that not only do they feel the endorphins, but they start, gathering all these ideas and insights, and they get a taste of that and they want more. And so these practices of mindfulness meditation, the experience that we just had, remember how I asked you, hey, notice if you've been pulled away. Notice the distractions. Don't turn away from them. Don't ignore them, right? Notice them, acknowledge it, name it, and gently, with kindness, return back to the anchor. Because that return back to the anchor, that acknowledging that we've been pulled away, and that gentle return back to the anchor that we established in the beginning of the practice, whether it's in the body, whether it's in the breath, whether it's with a word we're using or a mantra, whether it's with the feeling tone or an emotion, because we could work with those too. There's many, many different practices. Remember, whatever it is that we establish as an anchor for the practice, that return home brings us neurologically into the prefrontal cortex. And we are building the mental musculature by acknowledging and gently returning. And even now, with over 20,000 hours or something like that of meditation that I've experienced personally, I will still have practices that are very busy, where my mind is very, very busy, where I feel really caught up, where I'm incredibly distracted. And those are important practices, because that's an opportunity to acknowledge and return. And I know that every time I do that, even if it gets frustrating for me and I start getting critical of myself, which I do, and you will too, right? It doesn't matter, because every time I name that moment of mindfulness, of being completely present with what's happening and tracking it, that neurologically I'm creating musculature in the mind and I'm protecting my brain from cognitive thinning, cortisol thinning from the aging process. Okay. So not only is the amygdala less active in regular meditators, there's less gray matter there. There's more activity in the hippocampus, which is related to regulating the amygdala. It helps regulate stress. And the prefrontal cortex is more active in regular meditators. So we could see this in imaging. It's fascinating work, and we'd be happy to share more with you if you're interested. So what happens? So what happens when we're stressed and we get caught up and we get really reactive? Well, we have to remember that we can quite easily interrupt that response. We could hack directly into the central nervous system. Just breathe. So just by breathing, we can shift out of the stress response, but we have to do it on purpose in a particular way, right? So back to that definition that I gave you in the beginning, that John Kabat-Zinn definition of what mindfulness is: paying attention in a particular way on purpose without the need to change anything. Okay, non-judgmentally. So I want you to imagine that you are in a situation where, even you could even bring it up, right? So imagine a situation recently where you were triggered. Okay. Now, did you react? You don't have to answer it to me. Just kind of acknowledge how it went down. Really feel it, like in your body. Oh, yeah, that's what happened, right? So you want to feel it. So the first thing we could do is we could notice, oh, I'm noticing that I am being triggered and I feel it in my body. So just acknowledging, recognizing. So you could write this down, this acronym. It's RAIN, RAIN. Okay, recognize that you are triggered. Anger is here. Frustration is here, whatever it is. Okay, whatever it is. Recognize. Sharon Salzberg, who's one of the great Western teachers of mindfulness in the West, she is one of the founders of the Insight Meditation Society up in Barre, Massachusetts. She says that breathing, the breath, is the ultimate mobile device. It is always with you. Always, from the time you are born until we leave this earth, the breath is there. So let's use it. So what does the body do when we get triggered? And you don't have to answer, or you could jump in and answer, but how does it feel when you feel triggered?
Tensed up.
Right. What happens to the breath?
Gets short or eliminated.
Short, shallow. Right. Your body's responding. Remember what I said. The body and the breath are always absorbing the environment. They're always reacting, whether or not we're paying attention. And we know this. We could use our soldiers at war as examples, right? So that happens for a reason, because sometimes the mind just can't process what's happening, what's in front of us. So the mind will literally shut down and just go into survival mode, and that will keep those soldiers alive. Yet, the stress of the situation lives in the body. It lives in the tissues. There's a teacher that always says the issues are in the tissues, right? And it's true. It is true. So the body has an experience, and sometimes we just ignore it, right? So When we speak of spouses, right? Because spouses know how to push our buttons. So you could practice this with your wife, right? You could say, oh, I'm recognizing anger is present. See what she says next time. Next time you get triggered, right?
If she throws something at me.
Yeah, anger is present. Okay, so recognize. The A in rain is to allow it to be there. Emotions are normal. We all have them. It would be ridiculous not to ever experience one of the hard emotions. Imagine if we never knew what jealousy was like, or shame. Okay, those are tough ones to deal with. Regret. We all know what those emotions are and what they feel like, because we are human beings having a human experience, and both the good and the bad are moving through us all the time. Okay, so it's okay to have a difficult emotion. It's here. Can I be with it? Can I just allow it to be here? Can I just allow it to move through me? 90 seconds, right? But what happens? Why do they stick around longer? Why do the emotions stick around longer? We get entangled with them, right? We get entangled. Stories come up, stories that might not even be true, right? Or memories come up. You know, 1 in 3 adults in the United States have experienced trauma, significant trauma. 1 in 3. Okay, so is it realistic that everyone you work with, everyone you come in contact with, everyone that you're friends with, even your family members, is it realistic that they could learn how to train up this skill of responsiveness without any support? Not if it wasn't a learned, if it wasn't taught. I don't know about you, but my parents certainly didn't teach me how to do this stuff. And now the science has changed. So we can learn that, hey, it's okay to have, a strong emotion because everybody else is having it too. So allowing makes space for it. It gives it permission to exist inside. And we could come into our bodies and notice it. Oh, anger's here. It's in my chest. When I get angry, I feel like fires in my chest. I feel it in the back of my neck, right? If I could just let it be here, then I could relax enough so that it could just move through me. And those sensations of discomfort could kind of settle. So when that space opens up, the next letter is I, and it's investigate. Can you get curious about it? Right? Is there something else going on? Is there something else there? So I may name anger is present, but maybe I'm really just scared. Maybe fear is underneath that anger, right? So we don't know, but we learn these in the practices. And investigation, once we could get really curious about something, it changes things dramatically. I want you to try it next time, really. Curiosity is a remedy for so many issues, and it immediately deflates the situation if you could get curious in relationship. N is nurture. Be kind to yourself. Don't be hard on yourself. Practice compassion towards yourself. Okay, so many people are so hard on themselves when they have experiences like this, especially if they go off the deep end, right? Especially if you just lose it and you start into attack mode. And guess what? I was at the grocery store a few years ago and really got reactive and to the poor clerk. And I was just, there was an unfolding of events that did this. And then I just lost my temper. I had it. And in that moment, I stood back and I thought, oh my God, I hope none of my students witness this, right? Like I'm trying to, holding myself to some ridiculous standard, but guess what? I'm human too, and just having a human experience. So this isn't going to turn you into Mother Teresa, right? It's not going to happen. But the time, the instances in which things like that happen to me now, except of course with my husband. So if you talk to him, he'd be like, oh no, she's just as crazy as ever. No, you know, those relationships are the hardest ones. There's a teacher that said, if you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family. Right? It's true. So, right. So those instances get stretched out, right? Once we have success in controlling the trigger, in noticing, in breathing really deep and long, in leaning into the qualities of the exhale that calm the system naturally, and using that acronym of RAIN, so 2 tools in one, right? Because sometimes just the breath, right? We know that if we could just ground in our feet and take 3 full deep breaths consciously, that the system, we could hack into the central nervous system and calm it down. However, adding this acronym, this practice of RAIN on top, is a game changer, right? It gives us an extra tool to use. Both together, really potent. Okay, really, really potent. So there's lots of tools like this in the practice. And the more we train up in those formal practices and build the capacity to get out of the amygdala. So really it just comes down to science. The more we train the musculature of the brain to have a pathway out of the stress center of the brain and go into higher thinking, it creates enough space so we could notice that the trigger's coming in, that we're feeling reactive, pause, allow, get curious, and let it move through. And by then, we're settled enough to be able to say, okay, I could respond to this in a skillful way where I'm not going to make the situation worse. And that doesn't mean that we turn into a doormat. It doesn't mean that we stop setting clear boundaries. It doesn't mean that everything turns into rainbows and butterflies. It doesn't mean that, you know, I'm a yoga and meditation teacher, so I must not be, you know, able to stand up for myself. None of that is true. In fact, just the opposite. What does it mean to just stand in your body and clearly articulate your boundaries? That's strength. But not everyone is able to have a clear, uncomfortable conversation. So we have to work on it. And we need to have the brain ready and able to do that work. Actually, we're going to stay on this slide for a second because I want to do a practice. So let's sit up nice and tall. And this practice really teaches, or it introduces, so teaching takes time, an introduction to the qualities of the breath that we could use in the formal practice, and those qualities can be transferred or repurposed into life in any given moment. So very easily adjusted into any situation. So again, just sitting up in your chair or standing on your feet, you can keep your camera on or off, that's up to you. Just sitting up nice and tall and closing your eyes. And if it doesn't feel comfortable to close the eyes, just set the gaze softly forward and down. And just bring your attention again into the body. And just orienting for a moment, noticing any new sounds or distractions in your view in this field of awareness. And now guiding gently your attention into the body, just noticing how the body is breathing right now. And notice where the body is breathing. And now see if you can name exactly where you feel the breath inside your body. And you could just do that silently to yourself. Where is the breath? This touch of the breath. You might notice the breath coming in through the nostrils, just brushing up against the top lip. You might notice the breath as it turns and dips down. You might notice it in the chest as the chest expands and contracts. And you might even notice the breath down deep in the belly, below the navel, just like a baby's breathing. So wherever you're feeling the breath most, I want you to see if you could gently land there in that touch of the breath where you feel most connected. And if that feels difficult, you can alternately anchor in the body, the hands, the feet. Now gently bring all of your attention into the inhale. Just letting the exhale, inviting the exhale to just happen on its own. And notice all of the aliveness in the in-breath, the vibrant wakefulness there. Notice there's a vivid quality to breathing in that freshens the system. And notice how your body receives that freshness, how it feels to notice the inhale. And now gently turning towards the exhale. So relaxing the attention on the in-breath. And really notice the relaxing quality of the out-breath, the exhale. Notice how the body responds to that earthy, grounded, relaxing exhale. Just staying with this quality of the exhale, this relaxing quality of the exhale for a few more breaths. Delighting in the softness. And when you're ready, you could just simply open your eyes and just take a moment to reorient. You might notice the energy has shifted a bit. We'll come back in for just a few more minutes to wrap things up. How did that feel for you?
It's great. I just need you here all the time with me to help me on this.
Yeah, that's the hope. So no, we have tons of resources in the portal and lots of recordings, and all of the recordings that we've put in there for you to work with are completely accessible and appropriate for beginners. And what Gretchen will do after our talk tonight is she'll bring them to the top of your inbox so you have easy access in, because it's just a matter of habit getting into the tools and working with them, and that does take some time to get everybody comfortable there. So this mindfulness of the body, what we did tonight is really the first foundation in the practices of mindfulness. And there are 4 foundations in these practices that we work with in the 8-week signature series. And but the most essential practices are right here. And we could spend a lifetime just working with the breath, just working with the body. And we could reap all of the benefits of the mindfulness practices just from the work we did tonight, repeating it again and again and again. So in other words, it does not have to be complicated. However, there's lots of options for people because, of course, everybody's different and everybody responds to different practices in different ways. So the most important thing is, if you didn't feel any benefits from tonight's practice, know that there's many other practices to work with and try. And I guarantee that if you keep looking, you will find something that feels so supportive and helps with this transformation with this relationship with stress. But I think that we covered everything else here. So I want to skip ahead because here we are, right? Here we are in this wild circumstance. And whether, wherever your feelings and thoughts are on what we're all dealing with, what we know for sure is that people are struggling. And this science, the study, not science, these surveys were actually done with the recent census poll. Doctors included some questions because they wanted to kind of take the pulse of Americans and see how people were doing. And some of the, results of that were staggering. So you can see the numbers here. We know that people need support. And I think it's important to really lean into, if you've been struggling personally or know somebody that has, is that this is an opportunity to destigmatize or pull the stigma out of mental and emotional wellness and health, because it is just as important as our physical health. So what you're doing right now, this commitment to showing up and being here tonight, just shows that you believe that too. And anything we could do to support people that are struggling right now is really good work. So where do you start? You start by knowing that you cannot get this wrong. You cannot do it wrong. You don't need to practice 45 minutes a day for the results. You could just practice 3 to 5 minutes every day and reap the benefits of this practice. The most important thing is that you're consistent. So we recommend really challenging you to commit to a 30-day practice. Try to really find the time of day that's most supportive to you. So give it over the next week. If you're really going to give this a try, test different times of day. So maybe start, I practice my meditation right after my coffee in the morning. So I have my coffee first, and then I do my meditation. And you may be a morning person and that may work for you, but you may not. So you can try it, maybe pockets throughout the day. You could build in pockets of time so you're not sitting at your desk all day, right? Go outside. If you're at the beach, go meditate and listen to the sounds of the oceans. That could be an anchor, and actually is an anchor that we teach in, I think, module 3 is working with nature. You don't have to worry if you miss a day. So if you miss a day, just start the next day and begin again. So think of the daily practice goal as daily-ish. And if you get about 25 days out of the 30 days in the month in, you're still going to have all the benefits of the practice cognitively and neurologically. Of course, there's a ton of resources. We are here for you. Please take advantage of the portal and all the resources in the portal and reach out to any of us for questions. We are here and we'd love to see you succeed.
Is it possible so I've told you before, I'm a runner. So if I'm out, could I theoretically be running? I can't close my eyes, but
no.
could I almost practice, I don't know, centering myself and sort of, thinking about that exercise while I run? Is that possible, or is there too much stimulation going on there?
Well, here's the thing. I have been running and I've been using the Nike running app, which is great, by the way. And Headspace, the head teacher at Headspace, Andy Pennicombe, has teamed up with Nike and does some mindful runs that are free on the app. So give those a try because they're great. They're really, really good.
All right.
And I'd love to see some on our own platform. So I'm already kind of thinking about ways in which we could do it. I see the benefit of it for sure. And I think running for me, especially during COVID, has given me a lot of faith and endorphins and how that just keeps us, steady emotionally during this time. So absolutely there's benefits to it. I still do my formal practice every day.
Yeah.
I really believe that, I really trust it. And I believe that we need that quiet and stillness. And there's something magic about stillness that happens, especially in building resilience and really building responsiveness. That's where I think there's something there. I think as far as feeling better, like getting something out of a mindful run, of listening to the guided meditations, there's something there for sure. But I do think it's different than my formal practice.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
Yeah.
I'll try it though.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. So we are out of time. I certainly will take more questions, but I also want to be mindful of your time. And I just want to thank you guys for being here with me tonight. And let me know if I could do anything to help.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it, Jennifer.
Thank you so much.
All right, Gretchen, thanks.
All right. Have a great night, everyone. And we'll see you soon.
Good night.
Okay. Good night.